In tonight's edition, engineers take the spotlight in a JSA report for skilled migrants, a questionable political dinner that no one wants to talk about, and cutting red tape for certain overseas trained nurses. The New Zealand Nomad visa takes off to try and fill the gap of mass migration to Australia, a processing times update, and dispelling more 491 visa myths. Hi, I'm Karl Konrad and welcome to the weekly edition of Australian Immigration News. This channel is proudly brought to you by Australian Immigration Law Services, the company I founded in Sydney over 26 years ago. The Australian Labour Market for Migrants report that came out from Jobs and Skills Australia this week highlights the national shortage of certain engineers across the country. The report emphasises that these shortages are prevalent across all Australian states and territories, indicating the challenge is a national rather than localised. However, not all engineering disciplines are equally affected. Table 2 highlights specific areas with significant employment growth. They are chemical and material engineers, civil engineering professionals, electrical engineers, and mining engineers. JSA has identified reliability engineer, logistics engineer, and robotics engineer as emerging roles with a high number of online job advertisements. Now, how all this translates into invitations for engineers through the skilled migration program is yet to be seen. The Australian newspaper recently covered an intriguing story in their national online publication titled PM, the Dodgy Foreign Student College, the Degustation Dinner, and Dan Andrews. The article describes how Anthony Albanese was the star attraction at a private dinner in a Melbourne mansion. He seated himself opposite to a wealthy foreign student education provider whose international college has been deregistered following an investigation by federal authorities that uncovered significant non-compliance issues. The online article has this mobile phone footage recorded of some of the conversations that took place at the table.
And funny enough, the visa was rejected from her husband's point of view.
So the wife's just organising this.
That's right. I've got no idea. I'm giving you feedback. But exactly what we were saying.
The logic there is that instead of being processed together, they're being processed separately.
Exactly.
And a different risk rating.
So they've been processed with reference numbers.
All gender jokes aside.
Yeah. They've been processed with reference numbers. So there's a big push right now in India where they're going, okay, well, let's go to New Zealand because Australia's taking 60 days minimum.
The Australians' The Front program recorded an interview with the journalist who broke the story, and he raised some very legitimate questions that still remain unanswered.
Around the table were members of Melbourne's Indian Australian business community, and it appears from the audio you've just heard that they've got some feedback for the Prime Minister.
It's not often that you get to see how Victorian ALP politics is made here.
Damon Johnston is the Australian's Victorian editor.
But this video, albeit short, shows you Dan controlling the discussion when issues around visas are raised. So, these are very significant issues, and I think the Australian public deserves to know exactly what was discussed, how much money was donated to buy a seat at this table, if in fact any was, and how many more of these sort of events are being held.
From all accounts, neither the Prime Minister nor Dan Andrews has said much about what transpired at this dinner or whether anyone actually paid to attend. However, it does provide a fascinating insight into the relationship between politicians and those wealthy enough to host the Prime Minister for dinner. I'm fairly certain the Prime Minister would not be accepting any invitation I extended, that's for sure. I'll leave a link to this Australian article in the description. This week, the federal government announced a revised Australian registration requirements for international nurses from certain countries. These changes will allow them to work in Australia's hospital system and aged care facilities at a significantly faster rate, reducing the registration period to a current 12 months down to just 6 months.
The federal government will introduce a new scheme to bring in more foreign nurses to work in Australia. Registered nurses from Britain, Ireland, Singapore, Spain and the US will be eligible to apply for an Australian nursing registration. Let's go live to Kira Hain at North Shore Hospital. Kira, how is the scheme going to work?
Now, to be eligible, you will need to have completed more than 1,800 hours over a period of 8 years, and it's expected that this scheme will be in full effect by April.
Sadly, there is no mention of the specific visas that these overseas nurses are meant to use to work in Australia. We are assuming that it will involve the employer-sponsored visas, particularly the 482 visa. While this may work for major hospitals as they do sponsor a significant number of overseas trained nurses and doctors, the situation is quite different for aged care facilities. Our experience indicates that many aged care facilities are reluctant to take on the obligations associated with the 482 visa. Since New Zealand has entered into a recession and faced a significant migration of people heading to Australia, the government has decided to introduce a new Nomad visa to help bolster the economy. This new visa will allow digital nomads to stay in New Zealand for up to 9 months and work remotely for overseas employers. While it seems unlikely that Australia will develop a similar program, especially with the influx of New Zealanders moving here and growing concerns amongst Australians about the lack of space. However, introducing this visa has excellent merits for all countries participating in such programs. News of the introduction of this program has not taken long to spread around the globe, so hang on to your favourite cafe spot, New Zealanders. Here they come. It's time once again to review the updated processing time figures. Today we'll compare these figures to those of November of last year, which was the last previous table. Remember, these numbers are the average of the times the 50th percentile. The 189 visa, the processing time has increased to 74 days. The 190 visa, unfortunately, has risen significantly to 19 months. This is understandably frustrating for those waiting. For the 491 visa, this visa processing time has remained relatively steady at 18 months, but of course is still high. For the 191 visa, the processing time has crept up to an unacceptable 9 months. The 887 visa, there's a slight increase, now it's 7 months. For the 300 visa, it's seen an increase of 1 month, bringing it to 9 months. For the 309 visa, in contrast, the processing time for this visa is down by 1 month to 10 months. For the 820 visa, there's a slight improvement also, with the processing times reduced from 10 months to 9 months. For the 186 visa, this remains steady at 5 months, but this likely reflects those fortunate enough to qualify for priority processing. While several figures show some reasonable processing times and improvements, in particular the spouse and the 300 visa, the 190 and 491 visa processing durations remain excessively high, which is concerning for many applicants. The 191 visa times are still getting worse, while this is something that should not be happening. Now it's time for some of our readers' comments who have raised some very good questions. Congratulations on reaching the 100k milestone. Thank you so much, Karl. You're amazing as always. Thousands of people will feel a sense of relief after watching this video. Well, I hope so. There is another big rumour circulating regarding the issue of remote work for the 491 visa holders when the employer is based in metropolitan areas or overseas. Could you please address this in your next video? I recall you made a video on this topic about 2 years ago, but migration agents now claim it was only applicable during the COVID-19 era. The requirements regarding remote working for the regional 491 visa have remained unchanged since day one, similar to those for the original 489 visa that preceded it. Remote working is completely acceptable. When assessing Condition 8579, the primary consideration is the location of where the visa holder is while performing their work, rather than the location of the employer, whether based in Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, or overseas. Any advice suggesting that remote work was only permissible during the COVID period is completely inaccurate. And the next one is, thank you for your information. Could you please create a video explaining whether the 491 visa holders are permitted to work from home while their company is located in the city? Additionally, how many days are required to attend office training sessions during the initial 2 to 3 weeks of employment? Or is it okay to work from home from one day of the job? Thank you very much. As mentioned earlier, the location of the employer is irrelevant when it comes to remote working. However, regarding the question of how many times you can enter a city area or a non-designated regional area, the policy typically allows for 1 day per month for training purposes only. If you plan to work in a non-designated area, even for training, for 1 day on a weekly basis, we believe this would compromise Condition 8579. This practice would potentially mean that 20% of your time is spent working in a non-designated regional area. And thanks so much for this lovely comment. Thank you, Miss Karl's wife, for controlling everything very well, and congratulations. There is a common old saying, behind every successful man is a woman, but these days the modern version is, behind every successful person is a supportive partner. How true that is. Well, that's all for another busy week in the world of Australian immigration. Remember, if you need help, we are always here. You can book an appointment online or just pick up the phone. As always, take care out there, and I will see you next time. So bye for now.